From homes in the middle of the ocean to houses on top of giant stone pillars, here are 10 of the most remote homes on Earth. Number 10. The Atchley family, Alaska. Deep in the heart of Alaska is one of the most remote homes and one of the most remote families in the entire world. There is only one family who lives anywhere along the 250-kilometer length of the Great Nowitna River in Alaska. In fact, these people are exactly 100 miles away from the nearest town, and they've only had a handful of visitors in the last 18 years. This is one of the most remote homes in the entire world, and one of the coldest. Meet the Atchley family, who spend 11 months out of the year in total isolation. The family only goes grocery shopping once a year. They have a cellar with over 100 cans of produce, everything from sugar to evaporated milk. The family mostly live off the land, hunting wolves, rabbits, ducks, and even black bears. These are real wild people, and they live in a very remote region. In an article by the BBC, it's reported that the family even keep their own time. They set the clocks depending on the daylight, and so they sometimes eat breakfast at 4:30 in the afternoon and have dinner at 10 in the evening before going to bed around 4 in the morning. This is a very unique lifestyle in a very unique place. Number 9. Katskhi Pillar Church, Georgia. The Kochke Pillar in Georgia is a limestone monolith rising 40 meters into the air. On top of the giant mound of earth is one of the world's most isolated churches. The pillar is approximately 125 miles west of the capital, Tbilisi, and it's no easy place to reach. There are no trains, and there's no airports. The only way to reach the isolated church is by car or bus. Then you have to take a hike at least 20 minutes just to get to the monolith. The church itself was built between the 6th and 8th centuries, and it was dedicated to a 7th century monk. Inside the church you'll find a burial chamber, a wine cellar, and 3 cells for the hermits. While the hermits don't live in the church overnight, they do make a daily pilgrimage up the side of the rock to get closer to God. And whether you like it or not, this church is strictly off limits to women. At no point in history have women ever been allowed to enter the church. It is only for men from a very specific religious order. So think about that before your next tourist trip to this incredible, isolated church. Number 8. Bishop Rock, England. How would you like to live on an island? Or better yet, how would you like to live on the smallest island in the world with a building on it? Probably not very much, as it would be extremely boring. 28 miles off the coast of England is a small archipelago of islands known as the Isles of Scilly, and on the very smallest island is a rather striking lighthouse. What is truly unique about Bishop Rock and its lighthouse is that the lighthouse covers basically every single piece of the island. The island is only large enough to keep the lighthouse on. There is literally no more room, and when there's a high tide, the entire base of the lighthouse is covered in water. This is definitely one of the most isolated lighthouses in the world, and it used to be the permanent home of a small group of lighthouse keepers. This began in 1858 and went on until 1991. For almost 100 years, teams of lighthouse keepers lived inside this horribly isolated place. These days, it's still a beacon of light, but it's also a small hotel where eccentric travelers can spend a few weeks of complete isolation. Number 7. House of Stone, Portugal. The House of Stone, otherwise known as Casa do Penedo, is a small and isolated home in Portugal. This home is unique for several reasons. First, for its total isolation in the Portuguese countryside. And second, because it was constructed between 2 giant boulders. This house looks like it belongs in the Flintstones. It is such a boggling and somewhat mystifying home that some people have claimed it doesn't even exist. But it absolutely does. The home has even been featured in a Portuguese movie called Moon. While the residents of this tiny structure have been left in peace most of the time, the House of Stone is now so famous that the property is surrounded by a barbed wire fence on all sides. We can only imagine this is to keep the photo-snapping tourists from breaking down the door and demanding a selfie. Number 6. Crystal Mill, United States. The Crystal Mill is a peculiar home located above the Crystal River deep in Colorado. It's sandwiched between 2 small towns and 7 miles southeast of Marble. It's essentially in the middle of one of the most majestically beautiful forests in the world. The mill itself was built in 1892 and was known historically as the Sheep Mountain Mill. It was first used as a wooden powerhouse, harnessing the energy from the river to power the giant air compressor inside. The air compressor inside was then used to run drills for nearby mines at Sheep Mountain and Bear Mountain. Registered as a historic place in 1985, the Crystal Mill still stands as one of the most beautiful and iconic wooden structures in all of the United States. This place is more picturesque than anything outside of a Disney movie. Although if you want to get there, you better have a four-wheel drive vehicle, a good pair of boots, and maybe even a horse. You can only reach the mill during the summer or fall months. But if you're in the neighborhood, it's definitely worth a visit. Number 5. McMurdo Station, Antarctica. McMurdo Station in Antarctica is as much a research base as it is a single home. First established as a United States research facility in 1955, McMurdo Station has become the largest base in Antarctica, with roughly 1,000 personnel living in its small community at a time. As you can imagine, the place is only reachable by boat, and they don't get many visitors. This is definitely one of the most remote places on Earth, at the very edge of the least populated continent. The station is on Ross Island, which is a small island of volcanic rock in Antarctica. The volcano actually looms above the town, and it's known as Mount Terror, but it's not as scary as it sounds. In fact, the only neighbors that the McMurdo Station has for thousands of miles is another base that belongs to New Zealand, the nearby Mount Erebus, another volcano, and hordes of emperor penguins. There is no doubt you're living in one of the most isolated encampments on Earth when your only neighbors are a few people from New Zealand and a horde of penguins. Number 4. Just Room Enough Island, United States. Welcome to the world's smallest inhabited island. Famously known as Just Enough Room Island, this incredibly rare house is a sight to behold. The island itself is only 3,300 square feet, just enough room for the small house, a single tree, and a pair of chairs for relaxing in the sunshine. In fact, the island is only about half the size of Bishop Rock, the tiny island in England with the lighthouse on it from earlier. Just Enough Room Island is dangerously close to the Canadian border, but it is still technically in United States territory. It sits in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and it's completely isolated from any other piece of land. If you want to go get groceries, you'd better get a boat. The strangest thing about this house is that no matter how many pictures you look at, there is never a boat sitting near the house. This makes us wonder how the people living there managed to get to the land. Do you think Amazon makes those deliveries? Number 3. Cougar Peak Lookout, United States. Cougar Peak Lookout is an extremely isolated lookout cabin located in the Cabinet Mountains of western Montana. It was first built in 1952 to replace an even older structure built in the beginning of the 1930s. It was initially used as a lookout post, but has since been turned into a rustic accommodation where nature lovers can go and spend some evenings perched on the top of a grand scenic lookout. This is the true definition of isolated. And while the lookout itself is incredibly small, only 14 feet by 14 feet, the real treasure is the tiny outhouse perched just 200 feet from the lookout. The outhouse overlooks an immense forest that appears to stretch on forever in the distance. This is a massive wilderness area, and the little old outhouse sits right at its peak. This is the most isolated bowel movement you will ever have, and we highly recommend leaving the door open, so that way you can truly enjoy Mother Nature in its naked splendor. Number 2. Solvay Hut, Switzerland. Talk about fresh air! The Solvay Hut is located on the ridge of a massive mountain known as the Matterhorn in Switzerland. The hut is 4,003 meters above sea level and happens to be the highest mountain hut ever owned by the Swiss Alpine Club. The mountain huts are typically used to provide shelter and food to weary mountaineers while they scale the mountainsides. However, this particular hut can only be used during emergencies. It's located roughly 2/3 of the way up the mountain, only 475 meters beneath the summit. This is a great place to stop and take in the scenery, but you're only supposed to stay there if it's a real emergency. The hut was first built in 1915, and all of the material for the building had to be brought up with the help of animals. Even still, it only took them 5 days to build the entire hut. In 1966, it was rebuilt, and a small emergency telephone was installed so that injured or despaired hikers could phone emergency services. The hut is so close to the peak that you can even see it from the front door. But don't look down. One wrong move could spell disaster, even at the front door of this hut. Number 1. House on Elliday Island, Iceland. The house on Elliday Island is in the Vestmannaeyjar archipelago. Well, you know what I'm trying to say. Icelandic names are hard. Anyway, off Iceland's south coast is undoubtedly the most isolated home in the entire world. The house is perched on the side of a green hill, which kind of looks like the impact crater of a comet. There are no other houses on the island, and the residents of the small house are all alone. Or rather, they would be if there were any residents. According to the Vintage News, this house has been completely empty since the 1930s. A small handful of families had indeed lived on the island during the 18th century, but life was brutal. The elements were miserable, the living was lonely, and the only source of food was from fish and puffins. In the 1930s, the last 5 inhabitants of the island moved to the mainland, and since then, this strange house has been an Icelandic icon. The island was only used lightly as a hunting base to hunt the majestic puffin birds. To this day, there is an Icelandic hunting association maintaining the house as a hunting lodge. Which of these isolated homes would you like to visit the most? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and come back again soon for another amazing video. Thanks for watching this episode. Did you like the video? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and be sure to like, follow, and subscribe.